This is Leadership Beyond, your community of conversation.
But this is the first time in my professional career that everybody, 100% of us, are consciously aware we are engaged in the change initiative.
Yeah, everything. I mean, COVID caused us all to go through change, right? At the same time, but our experiences were so different.
Facing these unprecedented times in isolation is pure insanity. Joining us today are Joan McArthur-Blair and Jeanie Cockell, authors of Appreciative Inquiry in Higher Education and Building Resilience with Appreciative Inquiry.
Joan and Jeanie are passionate about a positive future, but practical in their acknowledgement that it's not easy, it's not always rosy, but there is a way through it. And so I really look forward to talking to them and hearing more about that and how they unpack all of that.
And building on that, I would just like to say that being both leaders in higher education, they have all of the academic foundation necessary, but they are always highly accessible, conversational, and willing to share their own personal experience, including a horrible car accident, and how we all can build a positive, hopeful future with whatever shows up: despair, hope, and forgiveness, and make the best of it. We're so excited for this conversation.
Let's dig in. Joan and Jeanie, thank you so much for joining us today. I would like to open up our conversation with a quote from you, a poem from you, Joan, in your book, Building Resilience with Appreciative Inquiry, that you two co-authored. Would that be all right if I open up with that?
That would be great. And it's great to be here with you.
It really inspired me, and I think it's going to set a nice tone for our conversation. We didn't set out on this journey to travel the path of resilience, but resilience howled to us, its voice hoarse against the wild wind of life. Can you say more about what inspired you with that? And how did you get there? How did you get to resilience from appreciative inquiry? Because that's your foundation, right?
Well, I think, I don't know if you want to start or I'll start, and you can. I think that quote that's set up for the book really says a lot about our path to resilience. You know, we're a couple of educators, we're not psychologists, we're not social workers, and so, but we've been fascinated by resilience and leadership and what allows people to be resilient in leadership in life. And so it's become kind of this longitudinal study. You know, we talk to leaders about resilience, we talk to people about resilience, we study other people's work on resilience, and it is like it's howling to us because it feels that at the basis of everything, every team building exercise, every undertaking with a group, every big strategic plan, every conversation with another human being, underneath that is that yearning to have the courage to step forward that day. And so resilience for Jeanie and I really does, I think, howl to us and has become paramount in so much of our work.
And the appreciative inquiry connection is, well, the leaders we actually interviewed for the book were leaders who practiced appreciative inquiry, because we had seen, as Joan said, that we've been doing this for a while and observing as AI practitioners with whatever tool we were using it for, that in fact, there was another layer always happening. I mean, even some people said, does that always happen afterwards? Or how does this happen? And it's about people really becoming an authentic and connected with each other, and how key that is to resilience.
What comes up for me that I think is a great differentiator, and I think David Cooperrider mentions it in his introduction, but talk a little bit about resilience, not as a prescription, but as a practice.
And the more we study resilience, the more this becomes kind of our profound foundation. that resilience is a practice. It's something that we undertake in the everyday of our lives. It's not something that we arrive at. And we'll talk probably a little bit later about hope and a hopeful view, but this idea that we can undertake today to be more resilient, even if we're having the most amazing day. It's like kind of filling our resilience bank account so that if tomorrow we need to make a withdrawal, we have some strength around that. And so to actually undertake in the day-to-day the practice of resilience, what is it we're doing that polishes our resilience for ourselves?
And I think the connection to appreciative inquiry again is we see appreciative inquiry as a practice. The most key part of appreciative inquiry is because there's lots of tools and processes and principles and all this sort of stuff. And the most important part is being appreciative inquiry. And that's such a powerful contribution to, as Joan's describing, the practice of resilience, because it's how you are venturing and evolving every day through the challenges that is the appreciative inquiry in practice. It's, as you say, it's being curious and being, valuing what's going on that's good and seeing and reframing your view into if that's not very good, what is the opportunity here? Behind every problem, there's an opportunity. And that kind of practice of appreciative inquiry, I think, is so profound in practicing appreciative resilience.
Sorry.
No, I was going to ask, how do you get there? Like, is there any element of this that is, as I was reading through pages of your book, I thought, well, is some of this innate? Is this learned? I mean, of course it's practiced. I think you have to practice everything to make it more internal to you, but is there a piece of this that just begins from a very young age that's not an awareness and a build upon intentionally, but just something that is a part of you as who you are?
This is kind of one of the big profound questions of resilience, right?
Mm-hmm.
You read resilience research, there's no question resilience can be learned and practiced. Mm-hmm. Is it innate? It's kind of that question that is unanswerable. Two people have the same experience and come out of that experience irrevocably changed, and they come out of it differently. Perhaps one with more resilience than the other. And so no one's landed on that exact answer. And so Jeanie and I live on that, learning resilience side, because we're interested in, it doesn't matter if it's innate. If perhaps I was born with more resilience, it doesn't really matter if I don't undertake to practice it. If I don't undertake to fill that well of resilience over a lifetime, it doesn't matter. My reserve is going to be depleted as much as the next person. And so I'm not sure that question in resilience has actually ever been answered. It's research, just touched on lots, but it's never really been answered.
Well, I think it's like all the nature and nurture.
Yeah, I was going to say nature and nurture.
Dialogue that goes
It's
over
both.
right? Where with chicken and egg and all the rest of it. But I think there's all sorts of privilege I was raised, so this is a nurture. Although I was born to the same woman, my mother was a really, really appreciative inquirer focus on. She didn't know that. And she was just amazing, but she raised us to see what we could do and what was before us as all sorts of opportunities. But I was raised in privilege. I mean, it wasn't like we were wealthy or anything in that kind of privilege, but we had that love and support from parents and family and the ability to do well in school and all of those kinds of things. I think all of those are advantages for people, but not everybody uses those advantages, as you were saying, right? Same kind of background could come into a crisis and not have the same resilience. I remember in the hospital, when I was in the hospital, I don't know what the poor young woman, I mean, I was in my 60s, right? And I just turned 60, hadn't I? And, I was having a great time because people were coming in. And because, again, I had that whole approach of looking at the world and looking at everybody, even if I couldn't move or talk even, I could smile and just listen, right? Whereas the poor young woman who came in with very similar accident to mine was just crying the whole time. And who knows, she had she had a friend that came in, I think a boyfriend. And so she did have support, not as much as the support I had around me, but I often wonder what was her background, which is one thing to think about. And how is it that different people respond to very similar sort of crises?
Well, I would like
We don't
to, and
know the answer.
this is a good transition. We won't fully answer the innate versus,
Yeah.
but it's a good thing to think about and be curious about. But I would like to suggest that the process, the way we normally think of resilience is in the frame of we get through. In other words, we survive. So we wish Joni didn't have an accident, but she's Jeanie, thank you. We wish Jeanie, and I was looking at Joan because what she said before, but Jeanie will bounce back. And that's true, and that is resilience. But I think what you're inviting us to, and this model invites us to, is much greater than just getting through. Human beings are resilient. There's probably no excuse for us to have survived all the years we have, with all their destructive tendencies. But there's something about the way we get through in this framework that I think, especially with COVID, there's a hunger for this, not just get through or get to a new normal, but really say, what can we do with all this mess?
Find
Go ahead,
something
Joan,
good
I
about it.
interrupted you.
Yeah, what can we do? What opportunities is this?
Mhm.
And we always say, for example, with COVID hitting us and us moving so much more online, how the access for people to the work that we do around appreciative inquiry to learn more about it. I mean, that's our goal, is to get this out into the world, that everybody's practicing from an appreciative inquiry framework at least, and understanding the notion of the power of seeing each other through that lens. And every crisis as an opportunity, or even minor problems, just thinking, well, what does that allow us to do? That whole learning through that lens of what could be better and what could be more, and based on what we already know we're doing well, what our strengths are, and all those kinds of things, I think is what we experience. We just immediately go to that because we just, I mean, this goes back to your other question about the practice, right? Because the more you practice it, it's important to practice it, because the more you practice it, the more it becomes sort of just natural, right?
And I think that Jeanie and I write a lot about the practice of hope and a hopeful view. To daily practice hope and a hopeful view. And in its most simple sense, you can practice hope every day by a simple gratitude practice. Getting up in the morning, and what are you grateful for? What is one thing that might give you joy? Jackie Kelms really started that in Appreciative Inquiry. But hope is this practice that we can undertake. How do we generate hope for ourselves and generate hope for other people? And Jeanie and I, in our work and our conversation with leaders, we think this hope and a hopeful view, the practice of it, is the foundation practice of resilience. What might I undertake in appreciative resilience today that creates hope and a hopeful view? And, simple example in Jeanie and I's life, we live on Vancouver Island in Canada, and we cold water swim. So at 7:30 a.m. this morning, we went in the ocean. The ocean is 7 degrees Celsius. It is cold. But when you stand there in that ocean, and the eagles are flying over in the morning because they come to fish in the morning, it just is the personification of the practice of hope. Maybe the hope that the water might be warmer tomorrow.
Right, that's what I'd be hoping for.
Yeah.
Another 80 degrees on that water tub.
So when you talk about hope, we need to talk about despair as well. And even when you talk about positive framing as a way not of denying or ignoring or escaping, there's things that we prefer weren't that way. And I think this would be a good time to really talk about the dance of hope and despair.
Yeah, and despair also is something that well, you don't know if you're ever going to get through, but you got to journey with it. Like, so whatever it is, you're on a journey, and recognizing that, and not sort of ignoring the times that you're not actually feeling great about it. I mean, like, I think lots of people say, oh, I've got to feel good. Christian choir is all about feeling good. La, 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 la. Hope's all about feeling good. You've got to sometimes just pause and breathe and say, what is before me? And then that actually allows you to say, okay, what am I doing well here? Again, back to that appreciative. What are my strengths that I'm using through these? How did I use my strengths through other kinds of very big challenges like this? You know, what happened, and how were other people, and how can I contribute to other people who are also going through? Because right now we've got lots of despair going on. So how is it we can each contribute to each other's journey? Is to recognize and to notice and to say something about how well people are doing, right? That's an appreciative practice. And that then sometimes people don't, and including oneself, you don't see that. All you're doing is going, oh my God, I can't do this. Oh my God. And instead, by actually pausing and saying, oh, but what can I do? Or then you get back to the hope. You get back to that hope of, oh, well, that's actually working well right now. This is moving along. And I know this journey might be for a while, but I'll be on this journey with that mix of emotions, and just kind of acknowledging that all of those emotions are valid and it's okay to be in that journey.
Well, and I think sometimes, Jeannie and I sometimes describe despair as a really bad house guest.
Yeah.
It shows up uninvited. It eats all your food. It leaves the house a mess. It won't do its laundry, and it won't leave. And so despair is kind of that thing, it arrives unbidden in our lives. And sometimes the very best we can do is get our socks on in the morning and get out of bed. And one of the things Jeannie and I say to people is that's an enormous strength.
Yeah.
To really, we think about this idea of having to dispel despair, to make it go away.
Yeah.
But if we think about having to live with that terrible house guest, what is your strength in living with that terrible house guest until it is done with you? Because despair has this quality of when it's finished, it begins to diminish in importance, but it doesn't go till that journey is over. We can't make it go any faster. All we can do is focus on our strengths, and focusing on our strengths helps us abide in that place of despair. Despair is not a nice thing, and we have a lot of despair going on in the world right now. In Canada, United States in particular, we have a lot of things going on related to COVID. People are tired. People don't know how to be with each other. There's so much going on that just is kind of this low-level despair in our society, and that's important for people to say, what was your strength today?
Yeah.
It reminds me of a bit of just acceptance, right? Like it's the glass maybe isn't completely full, and accepting that, and where do we go from here, right? And I think once there's that acknowledgement and that acceptance, and maybe that gets us to the third element that you have in your book, right, of forgiveness. Like what's that next step?
I was going to just jump onto that, Adrienne, because I think that's, yeah, that sort of pausing, breathing, letting go, accepting, because you're not going to be able to change things that you need to move on from, but being able to forgive in that sense of that pausing, letting go, accepting allows that journey back to hope, and both self-forgiveness and forgiveness of others. I think often some people anyways have trouble forgiving themselves, and that's a practice. Then the practice is to say, okay, this is this, but I can say, okay, I can do something else now. I can now focus back on my strengths and move along, but I can pause and say, I'm going to let go of that.
We think about hope, despair, and forgiveness
Yeah.
as this kind of, elastics that grow and compact in your life. That gateway back to hope is through forgiveness. When we interviewed leaders, they talked about the power of forgiveness, not absolution, but the power just to forgive what has happened, however big or small. Like sometimes forgiveness is simple, and sometimes forgiveness is enormous. And so that movement to hope, you know, forgiveness is the person that takes your hand and walks you back to hope.
I love that. And those three all play together. And it seems to me that they have to all play at the same time, although one might be taking the lead at a particular point in
Yeah.
time. But the hope being that the other two are somewhere not too far behind and they can be brought along. And it's
Yeah.
the three working together.
And we don't
very
have to
interesting.
control all of that. That's the
No.
part I have to remind myself. We have to
Yeah.
notice it and appreciate it and but not control the mix, because then you're back to medicating. And speaking of medicating, oh, I'm sorry, Joan, I interrupted you.
Nope.
Well, I was just going to say that we remind ourselves all the time. I don't think we have a conversation where one of us does not say, don't forget to breathe. Right?
Yeah.
Even if good things are happening, right? And it's
Yeah.
just crazy positive things happening, it's still don't forget to breathe. And you know, I guess that's part of all of this practice.
And it's the power of partnership at every level, is whether it's a boss employee or spouses or friends or whatever, is you just can't see your own blinders, no matter how smart you are. And how, is Adrian saying, Tom, breathe, it's legal, it's ethical. It's like, I forgot, thank you.
And more often it's probably Tom telling me to breathe, but
well, it
he's
goes
being
both
kind.
ways. There's no competition there. But I think a good way, because we've touched conversationally on the alive model, but I think a good way to just spell it out is beginning with the car accident, because I think, if I'm right, that's when the acronym first came, and then you two can decide how to divide up explaining the alive model. But it's so practical. And
I'll start with when the acronym actually arose, which is when I actually came to consciousness after several days after the car accident. I still have no memory of, which was 2010, so a while ago now. And being intubated, couldn't move, couldn't speak. Joan was next to me, my sister. Joan had come from across the country at the end of the bed. I'm going, what are they doing here? People running around. And I was going, well, I don't seem to be able to move or talk or anything. I don't know what's going on. And all I could feel was the euphoria of being alive. I'm alive. I'm meant to still be alive. For some reason, I'm meant to be here. So when we went and we were, writing the book, I guess a couple of years, well, a year or so later. No, that was the first book. That was several years later. Several years later, we got to the resilience book. And we really wanted to write. Oh no, it was in the first book. I'm getting so confused, aren't I? The first book is where the chapter on alive really began too, is in our higher ed book, AI and higher ed. And I said, I really want to use an acronym for a model that we really want to do for this chapter on challenging times, living through challenging times. And I said, well, it has to have appreciative and inquiry in it. What else does it need to have? Love, getting closer to alive. And then what would the V and E be? Well, of course, once you appreciate, love, and inquire, you're able to then venture and evolve, because you're never the same. You're always evolving. So it just seemed so perfect. It just kind of came to us.
Well, and those first three, and Jean, this is interesting because Jeannie and I we had been working with resilience prior to the Alive model.
Yeah.
But it began to solidify. Alive really is a model for challenging times.
Yeah.
And we thought this really was our resilience work, to focus on challenging times.
Yeah.
And then the progression from the Alive model to the appreciative resilience work really began to add those other elements of hope and forgiveness in our conversations of resilience. But as Jeannie said, the first three letters, to appreciate, to increase in value, to be fully aware. The second letter, to love. And this is something that, people struggle with that word, and yet fundamentally resilience has that thing in it, to love self, to accept the love of others, in complex times. I had this amazing experience after Jeannie's accident. I'm in an elevator. I've come back to the main hospital. She's over in rehab hospital by now because I need a phone number. Uh, um, and I'm in the elevator. Young doctor steps in the elevator and looks at me and goes, "You and Jeannie aren't still here, are you?" Now, the fact that he knows me indicates, the experience of having Jeannie and I there in the hospital. And I said, no, she's in rehab. I just came back. I needed a phone number for someone. And he said, she's amazing in her healing. And I said, yeah. I said, all that you did for her here made such a profound difference. And he looked at me and he said, yeah, we do some amazing work. But he said, I think it's all about love.
Wow.
And to me, it really solidified that abiding with other people when they're in challenging times. To just give them what love you have. And to inquire, of course.
And love, like resilience, is a verb. We think of it often as, I either have it or I don't, or she doesn't love me. And it's an activity where you hold the other as other. Yeah. And it's a challenging activity, no matter how much you love someone, because in this moment, it's really a decision to focus on what they need rather than on what we need.
Yeah, who are you supporting? Who supports you, right? Love, that's all love, right? I mean, love doesn't have to be falling in love, that kind of love. It all could be too, right? And I think that's it. And we started to do a lot of workshops around, appreciative inquiry in challenging times, using the Alive model, and people always drifted right to the love, and found that it was the most powerful place to start as they looked at the model and thought, well, who supports me? How can I support others? And all that kind of stuff. And who's having conversations around love? It's like
in
our
business, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's like our hope, despair, and forgiveness. The leaders we interviewed and said, well, thank you for the opportunity to talk about despair, because I'm not allowed to. I'm a leader. No leader is going to be allowed to go, ooh, what would my reputation happen? What would happen to my reputation, right? It's like, so, these are things that as human beings, to move forward with each other and really ourselves as leaders, I would consider everybody a leader. Everybody who wants to move positively, because we focus on positive leadership, positively along in the world, contribute to the world. I mean, we all go through these things, but we don't always have opportunities to share, and that is so important, and to connect, and that's really love. We don't focus on using that word so much in that sense, but it is a love. It is to open yourself up to others and to be vulnerable and to support yourself and others, and then other people open up. I mean, it's amazing when you open up, how other people then open up.
Yeah, I think and what I celebrate is so much of the communities now that leaders and speakers are talking about the very sense of just being human, right? Like, I think this is the next wave of leadership, is we're human first.
Almost as though it's a new thing, Adrian.
Right.
It's so interesting to point that out.
Right, but you have to be a leader.
We suddenly discovered we're humans.
To be a leader, you have to have it all together all the time. No, right?
No.
Like, I think I'm so excited that we're starting to break that down. When I was, it was at a pivotal decision point for me. I was in about 20 years in corporate talent management, HR roles, and I was deciding to begin my own practice or not. And I was in a really, really tough project. And I created this mantra, start with love and seek to understand. And I started just saying this a lot at work. And one other leader stopped me and said, start with love? And I was like, yeah, love. But he was so like, but you're at work. Like, it's okay.
That's such a wonderful story, Adrian. Thank you.
And it just really so hopefully you keep saying these things and we keep talking about it, and it just maybe makes it a little bit more comfortable as people start, just appreciating that we need love as humans, right?
Yes.
And our audience gets this obvious secret that if it hasn't become clear now, by now, it will. And that is, this is enormously practical.
Mm-hmm.
And you think about how much appreciative inquiry has been focused on problem solving, which is usually how people work together, is to really say that part of our problem is just seeing what is, appreciating it, coming from a heart and a mind of love and appreciation. And most of our prescriptions are very short term. And they're not bad, but if you think of resilience practices, meditation or whatever, they're all okay and they're all useful. But the core of this issue is, how do we live better? How do we love better? And then the other things come into focus. So it's very practical.
Yeah.
And I love the two words in the Alive model, venture and evolve. Because it doesn't matter how tiny the challenge is or how big the challenge is, we are forever and irrevocably changed. Right? This idea that resilience takes us back to something.
Bouncing back. That's it.
Bounce back. There is no back to go back.
There's
We
no
all know this
bounce.
from COVID. We've been irrevocably changed.
The new
from
normal
COVID.
was our thing, and I hate that term.
Yeah.
We got to create something.
Yeah.
And just to open to that venturing, however small it is, and to recognize the evolution. You think about the example you were giving about saying, love first and then, let it, that is evolving the workplace, right? You're actually seeding something, and people go, we can't be doing that. But in
So taboo.
saying they can't be doing that, they are thinking about doing that, right? And so I love those things that become seeds and start to change that evolution of who we are individually and as leaders in the workplace.
Yeah. And of course, I had no idea, right? It was more about my own coping at the moment. And hopefully it was a seed,
You were
that took off.
resiliencing. You just didn't have the term yet. You were resiliencing. What I also like about that is that it's intentional. And that is within our control. So you're going to evolve.
One way or another.
Yeah.
One way or the other, yeah.
Do you actively contribute of the qualities that you want seeded in the evolution? And most of the time we're not. That's why I need you guys.
Well, and I love that what you just said about the qualities in our venture and evolving. Despair has this enormous capacity to make us want to look at our feet, just to look down. In any kind of venture, even the most simple, gives us the strength just to look up, even for a moment. And looking up for a moment, we can do it again and again.
But I think because we're running short on the time, there's a couple of thoughts I have to wrap this all up. But rather than have thoughts, I'll turn it back to Adrienne and let her roll with it where she wants to.
Yeah.
Can I just add something? I wanted to add about.
Yes.
Tom, you were saying something about like meditation and all those practices. One of the things that we do with all of our models is we ask questions, right back to the notion of, you don't do step 1, step 2, step 3, but we ask questions around each of these parts of the Alive model. We ask questions around hope, despair, and forgiveness. And some of the questions might be, what practices do you do? Because everybody has their own practices.
Yeah.
Some people pray and some people meditate, or some, it's all centered on the fact that people know how to be resilient if they get to be asked.
If you ask those questions, I love that. So,
and so it's a reflective practice then, whatever model you're using. And those questions allow that to surface, whether they surface the same as for me and you, or, or not. It's a resilience practice that should be valued and practiced more of. That's the appreciation required. Do more of what's working for you, and then think about what else you might build onto that. So
that's very helpful, that framework, because there is a temptation to come up with the 3 keys or 4 steps, and most of the things that are under there are well and good, but they're not integrated. So they're not integrated to the receiver of them. And it is questions and conversations that integrate them. And you may end up doing the same practices, but you won't do them in the same way, because you're coming from a deeper place. That's just as you said that, that's just my thought.
Yeah.
Yep. And that takes you right back to a comment I was sharing around when I received your book, and I was looking at the table of contents, and you know what I did? I jumped, oh, great, we're going to get the magic sauce. I'm jumping right to chapter 6, which is how to practice, right? Yeah, and it's the questions, but it's so wonderful and helpful that you've added those pieces to your book and the workshop guidance, so that empowers others to bring it forward, and clearly that is your intention, and we so appreciate you bringing this to the world and making it a tangible way to practice and to start bringing some of this to life.
And I know we're running down on time, but just for fun, I want to challenge anybody who's listening to this today as they kind of drift off to sleep tonight, to think about how you've manifested hope and a hopeful view for yourself and others. And just take that reflection and the joy of what little things you did that provided somebody else with hope off into your sleep.
I love that. And we welcome you to post that on a Leadership Beyond LinkedIn page if you want to share it, or to reach us if you just want someone to hear it and don't want to share it publicly. Either way, because we want this to be a conversation, and we're just honored to be connected to you and your work, and appreciate you making space for this conversation.
Yeah.
We've
Thank
so
you, Joan
enjoyed
and
it.
Jeanie.
Thank you so
This
much.
has been wonderful.
Great conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Leadership Beyond podcast. We hope you benefited from this conversation as much as we have. We invite you to join our community of conversation. Subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Don't forget to sign up at aleadershipbeyond.com for free materials and updates. That's aleadershipbeyond.com. Join us in 2 weeks for our next episode.